Hi, I'm Pastor Dave with Interpreting the Times, and welcome to the final hour. Okay, for this podcast, I'm extremely excited because I got a very, very special guest. Most of you who watch this will probably already know him. His name is John Holler. Now, you know John from his prophecy updates. John has been an attorney. He has 45 years of experience being an attorney. And back in 2013, he was part of a group that started Fellowship Bible Church in Ohio. And John is still an elder there and a teacher there. In fact, his teaching is incredible. He's a dynamic teacher, and that's what brought me to him. He was on the board of Grace College and Seminary. He spent 25 years, I believe, if that was correct, over 2 decades doing that. So with all of John's degrees and his intelligence and his teaching and experience, I think the thing he'll talk about most, and you got to correct me with this, John, did you not get 2 hole-in-ones in 1 round of golf?
Yeah, I don't really like to talk about it, but since you brought it up,
I did.
I had a friend who got me started playing golf. So in 1995, he came back, and the closest course to my house was Muirfield Village, which was built by Jack Nicklaus, and he had his memorial tournament there. So my friend Glenn would come from Arizona, and we'd play golf in the morning and go to the tournament in the afternoon. So Sunday morning, we skipped church, we went out, and I had a hole-in-one on the second hole, 175 yards, and then 2 holes later, I had another hole-in-one, 195 yards.
Is there any video proof of this?
No, but Glenn is still alive. He lives in Sun City, Arizona, and I keep I'm going to get a call someday like your witness is going to pass on unless you cough off, a liver or a kidney or something like that.
There you go.
Keep him alive. I'll have to draw the line at the heart, though. So that's.
Well, I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, so Sun City's not too far north of where I'm at.
Can I tell you
track him down.
Yeah, my favorite golf. I've played much golf in Phoenix in my life, but I missed a 3rd hole-in-one in that round by 1/8 of an inch. By the way,
that's okay. You've been a trifecta would have been just impossible.
I would have been unbearable to do this. But let me tell you a quick golf story. So do you remember Zola Levitt?
Yeah.
So Zola was a good friend of mine, and we used to play golf together before he passed away, way too early. But we're out in Arizona or out in California, we're playing golf, and Zola loved golf, but he hated being in the bunker in the sand. Mm. And we're playing at Oak Quarry in Riverside, and he's in a bunker on every hole. So we get to the 8th hole, he's in the fairway bunker. We get up to the green, there's a little tiny pot bunker by the green, and he's in it. So I walked up to him, and, I'm a pretty tall guy, as you know, and I'm standing way up on the green. He's down in a deep bunker, and I looked at him, and I said, Zola, I love you, man. I haven't had you on the clock today, but I'm pretty sure you've now spent more time in the sand than your forefathers did getting from Egypt to the promised land. And he laughed. He thought that was funny. He was a great guy. I really miss him.
There you go. Well, thank you for that story. And while we do that, let me officially welcome you to the podcast and say thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here. I appreciate it. And to kind of give a little background to this, John and I were at a conference in California a few weeks ago. And in the green room, we just got talking about Israel. We both have a love for Israel and spending time over there and doing tours over there. And I said, hey, can you come on and do a podcast? And eventually, really what I was intentionally to do was just talking about Israel and carrying on that conversation that we had in the green room. But in the last few days, Syria's kind of blown up. And I said, okay, can we kind of talk about Syria and what's happening there? So, John, I consider you an expert on the Middle East and what's happening over there. And I'm hoping to bring some clarity. And I want to go somewhat deep on this, but I also want to make it where the average person can understand it. So if I'm understanding this correctly, we have several groups that are fighting over in Syria. I don't know if you want to call it a civil war or what's happening, but you got the Syrian National Army, which Turkey is supporting and backing. They're opposing Assad, the leader of Syria, and they're also opposing the Kurdish group over there, the Syrian Democratic Forces, correct?
Right.
And then you've got Assad, though, being supported by Russia. So help me understand this.
And
with the 3 groups involved, and if you get Turkey, backing the National Army, but you've got Russia backing Assad. How does Russia and Turkey come together? How does this whole thing work out? Your expertise, can you help us understand?
I think I was trying to figure out, I like to do PowerPoints and graphics because I think sometimes that's the way to do it. And I was talking to somebody, maybe it was Tom Hughes last night or something, and I said, how would you describe the situation in Syria? And I said, take a bunch of spaghetti and make it black, and then throw it in a white bowl, and then throw a bunch of decals of these different militia groups on top of it. Or you know how you used to have headphones, without wires, and I used to put them in my pocket, okay? And I would pull them out of my pocket, and what did I have? I had a big mess of knots.
Yep.
And I'm like, how does that even happen? What are the physics of that? I'm sure there's a YouTube video on why that happens. But that's really a good picture of how Syria is right now. It is just an absolute complete mess. I don't know how to describe it. So let me give you just a little bit of personal history.
Sure.
In 2011, we went to Israel, and it was March of 2011, and we were up in the Golan Heights, and we spent the night on the Sea of Galilee at the south end. There's a resort there.
Yeah.
And I woke up in the morning, I checked the newspaper, like I always do, and it said there were riots going on in Syria, 30 miles away. So here we are. The Sea of Galilee was like glass that morning, perfectly calm, beautiful. 30 miles away, Syria is starting the beginning of what now is known as the Syrian Civil War. The statistics on the Syrian Civil War are shocking. At the start of the war, Syria was a population of 23 or 24 million people, largest city being in Aleppo, Damascus being the second largest city, the capital. But since that started that civil war, I would say that it's very safe to say, some say 600,000, I use the number over 1 million, are dead.
So over a million lives have been lost in that civil war.
Right. And my question is, how many marches of protest about dead Arab lives have you seen at Columbia, at Harvard, at Yale, at UCLA in that period of time? And the answer is you've seen absolutely zero, because they don't matter. There have been millions and millions and millions of refugees. Turkey hosts over 3 million refugees. Jordan hosts over close to 3 million refugees from that war living in Jordan. It has for 12 years, 13 years now, almost 14, taxed the sparse water resources of a country like Jordan.
Well, didn't Jordan, the second largest city in Jordan, would have been the refugees camps from Syria? Is that correct?
That's correct. There's a couple huge camps up on the Syrian border.
Yep, correct.
Lebanon has had between 1 million and 1.5 million refugees.
Right.
And what happened? So, and nobody talks about this, and it's just sort of assumed. There's a lady I've started following recently. She did a great podcast interview with Elon Levy at a State of the Nation, I think is his YouTube channel. And she was talking about the fact that there's this big conflict, and when we get to Israel, I'll talk about that. But recently she puts up some great tweets with videos, and she said that the reason that nobody cares about why hasn't the International Criminal Court prosecuted or issued arrest warrants against Assad in Syria,
right,
or other Arab countries where things like this have happened? And the answer is, she said, because they've done it to their own people. And so she said the solution for Israel would be to just take over all that land in Gaza and Judea, Samaria, are also called the West Bank. And then Israel would be doing it to its own people, and the problem would be solved. The ICC would not have any concern about it. I thought it was a very astute point, because Assad, listen, look, the United States has messed around over there too in ways that we probably shouldn't have. But Russia came in there back about 2014, entered into the Syrian civil war at the request of Assad to help him out. And since that time, Go look up the pictures. Go look up of a drone of Aleppo, a drone
Oh,
of Homs. You've
yes.
seen the pictures,
Yeah, the ports and the airport there. Well, you have the
right?
ocean ports and you have the airport. I mean, they were there
Right.
long term when they put that
Well,
structure in.
but what they've done is there was a general who was the head of the armed forces of NATO. His name was Breedlove, and he testified before Congress because you had Jordan and you had Lebanon and you had Turkey getting massive numbers of refugees. But what happened? There were more. There were a couple million that left and went to Europe. Look at what's going on in Europe right now. Look
Exactly.
what's going on in the UK with these refugees. I don't know how to say this because I don't want this to sound racist. And the person that I know, they do a lot of ministry in foreign countries. They're not racist, okay? But I spoke in England 6 years ago this month. And we were coming down from where we had the conference. We're going down to London for about a week. And as we're driving into London, my driver, a missionary, goes, now we're in London and it's time to play our favorite game. Can you spot a real Englishman? That was 6 years ago. That was after the massive Middle Eastern immigration of Islamic radicals from the Middle East into Europe. It's changed Germany. It's changed France, the Netherlands. It's a massive, massive problem.
Well, when you were there, were people welcoming those, or were they upset by the massive amount of immigrants coming into their country?
Listen, we stayed at the Marriott Marble Arch. Marble Arch is in Hyde Park. The Marble Arch, it used to be at Buckingham Palace. They moved it across the park to this place in Hyde Park. And it's where this famous place is called Speaker's Corner, the great free speech place of the UK.
Yep.
I don't know how to describe this. The TV channels available to us in our hotel room in London, 4 blocks from Speaker's Corner, across the park from Buckingham Palace, had 50 channels. 10 of those channels were Arabic. Now, and I am telling you that area of London, and having gone out and walked around with it, now I didn't feel unsafe or anything, but I'm just telling you, I saw more burqas in London around my hotel than I ever did when I traveled through the West Bank in Israel,
Wow.
The Islamic areas of the West Bank.
I've not heard that story before.
I'm just telling you, as I try to pay attention to these things. And so, look, these people all need Jesus. I get that. But I'm just telling you, we're in this massive geopolitical shift. And part of it was these refugees that came out of Syria. I have almost like heat maps showing the flow of refugees coming out during that period of time, like time lapse. It's unbelievable. The millions of people that came from Islamic countries through Syria and out of Syria, but other Islamic countries into Europe.
Well, when we get back to looking at what's going on with Syria now, I know Turkey opposing this and going after them. I know Erdogan, he wants to basically extend his borders all the way down to Aleppo if he could. He wants to kind of take that over. Just for the average Christian, average Bible student, not to be rude, but how do you answer the question, why should I care about that, or why does this matter? Do you see Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus coming to this? Do you see what happens between Russia and Turkey? Prophetically, how do you see this all coming together eventually?
Yeah, so I will say this. I'm sort of, as I've studied and watched geopolitics a lot over the last 25 years that I've been doing these updates, I would say I'm less dogmatic about how it works out now than I used to be. But certainly there's an Ezekiel 38, 39, there's Isaiah 17. I happen to think I'm more inclined to push those towards the Armageddon scenario at the end. If you read, we all want to cite Isaiah 17, the destruction of Damascus, but we don't want to talk about the other parts of Isaiah 17. And, it talks about Ephraim and other parts of areas in the Middle East. And it really sounds like total, absolute, complete, devastating destruction, which I sort of tie to the Armageddon scenario, the final push on Jerusalem,
Right.
and what happened. So, but we can argue about that. What I say is you really need to pay attention because I cite this verse all the time in my updates. Daniel chapter 12, and you could say pick the verses out of Daniel chapter 11 as well. It talks about Daniel wants to know when's all this stuff going to be in Daniel 12, and he's told, son,
Right.
wait.
Yep.
Seal up the book until the time of the end, and then the wise will understand and instruct many. That says that in Daniel 11.
Right.
But
Correct.
the wicked will never understand.
Correct.
So the question is, do we want to be wise people who understand? So in order to do that, I think it's imperative that we be watching what's going on.
Right.
Not and the other thing I think we sometimes do in the Bible process community is we want to plant our flag and say this is that. So Joel Richardson, who I know, and I know a lot of people disagree with him on things, but he's doing a really good series right now called Fulfilled. What does it mean when Bible prophecy is fulfilled? And is there only one fulfillment? And because it's kind of tricky. So we can say that most prophets, especially the Old Testament ones, we were talking about this beforehand, they wrote for their own time. But the prophecies they gave also would relate to the time of the first coming of Christ and to the second coming of Christ. So it's a little bit hard for us in the West, where we kind of like to put everything in a little box and we want to plant our fulfilled flag on it, and then we can just kind of shove that off to the side. That box we can shove away. It's not fulfilled. And I have these discussions with people all the time. So in Daniel, it says at the time of the end, seal the book up until the time of the end. And then the wise will understand. And it says going back to and fro and knowledge increasing. I think this is another indication of how Jewish thought, Eastern thought, approached Scripture as opposed to us who are kind of Greek and Roman, logical, and that type of thing. So they would say that there's multiple fulfillments. So for example, and it gets tricky for us because there's like a big final fulfillment that's really a fulfillment.
Well, Joe Richardson does a great job with that. He kind of gives a brand new definition of fulfillment, what it really means, from both the Western side and from the Middle Eastern side.
Yeah, and I think it's a series that people should listen to. Now, it can get very confusing. So this is one that I've struggled with myself. Jesus said in John, I think John 6 or someplace like that, another will come in his own name, and him you will receive. He's talking about, so you're going to receive a false Messiah,
correct,
an Antichrist figure. Well, I don't think there's any question that a fulfillment of that passage occurred during the Bar Kokhba, because he came and he was accepted as claimed to be the Messiah, and a lot of people accepted him as Messiah. So in 133 AD, you could say, this is a fulfillment of this prophecy, but the question is it the fulfillment? And then the question is, does that recapitulate itself in the end times? So I've taught for a long time that as I understand the way this works, the prophecies given by Jeremiah and that type of thing around the time of the fall of Judah, the kingdom of Judah to Babylon, will be a picture of things that are going on in the church in the last days.
Right. Well, you have that with the Syrian king too, during the Maccabean period.
Absolutely. And so and that's another example. So we read these passages in Daniel 11, especially up to about verse 35, and say, oh, well, that was the Antiochus Epiphanes or Epiphanes, however you want to say that.
Right.
It's one of those words where somebody can say it and you say, oh, no, that's not the right way to say it. It's said the other way. And then you can never say it right. You can always be criticized for saying it the wrong way. But some people say, well, that was Antiochus in the time of the Maccabees and that type of thing. And then, but then the question is, was that it? Was that everything that happened?
Well, it was a foreshadow. I mean, we have Hanukkah, people go back, but it was a foreshadow. It wasn't the time, it was a foreshadow.
That's correct. And by the way, I did a teaching a long time ago on Hanukkah, and I said a future Hanukkah was the title of my talk.
I bet that was well received.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about Jewish feasts and everything, even in the pro-Israel part of the church, a lot of people are going, well, that's just for the Jews. That's just for the Jews. Oh, wait a minute. But Romans 11 is we're grafted in. Now, there are a whole lot of implications from that, and I don't want to get into this Shabbat and all this other stuff. That's not the purpose of this. But what I'm saying is, eventually, we're the redeemed people of God joined together in the same, grafted into the same tree, the root of which is Christ.
Right.
And so I think we need to kind of reorient. And I think thinking this way is part of this whole end time scenario as to how this thing is going to work out. That we need to adopt a better Jewish understanding of the scripture.
And to come back to that, because we brought up Isaiah 17 in Damascus. Some people would say, well, that took place in 722 when the Assyrians came over and wiped over and went and took out the 10 tribes of Israel. But as you continue in Isaiah 17, Isaiah tells us when he received that vision. He received that in the year King Ahaz died, which was a good 13 or 15 years after the fact. So we know it didn't take place in 722, which means it's still a yet event to come. Now, it may be, as you're saying, towards the end of the tribulation, and maybe before that. There's different views as far as when it's going to happen. We're not trying to put times and dates on place. But I think it's interesting to kind of get back on track. I just found an article from World Israel News where they're saying that the Syrian leader Assad, he had the guts to go to Israel and ask Israel for help with what's going on in this country now. And Israel replied saying they would respond with they gave a demand saying they won't do anything until they remove the Iranian forces from Syria, which of course they can't do. But do you find it fascinating that Assad went to Israel and said, will you help us with this mess here?
No, I think people have survival tendencies regardless of their religious or political orientation. So they'll look for somebody who they think can help. And I think it's an indication, assuming this actually happened, that Assad thinks he's in big trouble.
Right.
So, interestingly enough, I think this came out Sunday morning just before I did my update. So I didn't have time to read it. And then yesterday, Carolyn Glick, I highly recommend people follow Carolyn Glick at JNS.
Yes,
and the other people at JNS. I mean,
yes,
this is like her. I think I texted her. I said, Carolyn, I want to get an interview, but I wasn't just saying this to be nice. I think I was talking to somebody in Israel this morning, and I said, a lot of you guys that I'm blessed to know, I think that this is your moment. Your whole life, God has been preparing you to be in the position that you are right now to be an advocate for Israel.
Right. I believe Carolyn moved to Israel. She was American. She was an American journalist. I believe she moved to Chicago.
Yeah.
Yeah. She moved to Israel to really report better on American politics, what's happening, because you get more truth over there. And then she just kind of does amazing work over in Israel.
She made Aliyah. She lives down in well, I don't know. I think she says she lives in a fraud. I've been to a fraud. I've been to Shabbat at friends of hers home there, just around a few doors down from where she lives. And these people are living in a fraud. There's no. I mean, you look at their home. You look on a mosque a half mile away, and there's no fence or anything in between.
Right.
And these are radical jihadis. A lot of them throughout the area of Judea. This is Judea and Samaria, often called the West Bank. So let's get back on track. So Assad would do this. So Sunday morning, David Wormser, who works at the Miskov Institute for National Security and Zionist Strategy, also at the Center for Security Policy with Frank Gaffney, and a great security guy. He worked in one of the Bush administrations.
I know Frank. Frank is a good guy. Yeah.
Yeah, Frank is a good guy. So David Wormser, he was on Carolyn. Carolyn interviewed him last night, and his article comes out. Now, his article is posted a couple of places. At JNS, the title of the article. And I just want you to read the title of the article or hear the title of the article and understand the apocalyptic character of what David Wormser is saying in the end times eschatological impact of this. And so the title of the article at JNS is Reflections on the Outlandish, Navigating the Strategic Earthquake in the Fertile Crescent. Phenomenal article. At his Substack, or a Substack where he writes, it was titled, Prepare for the Disintegration of Syria and the Rise of Imperial Turkey.
I got the article right here.
Yep. Yeah.
That is an amazing article. I have to say it's an amazing article.
And the interview with Carolyn was everybody that cares about Israel, who wants to understand a little bit about what's going on. So to summarize what David said and what he said in his podcast with Carolyn is that Turkey sees this as an opportunity to do what it's wanted to do. Erdogan has spent over 20 years changing Turkish society from top to bottom into a version of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
He was very much behind the Muslim Brotherhood takeover of Egypt that was kind of overrun then again in about a year. But he's involved in all this stuff. I mean, if you go to Jerusalem and you walk around the old city and you talk to people, especially in like the Armenian quarter of the old city, it will take you about 20 seconds to run into somebody associated with Turkey.
Yes.
In East Jerusalem, he is funding a lot of that unrest. He has designs on the Temple Mount. Erdogan has jailed more journalists than any other person on planet Earth in the last 10 years. He has changed, the Turkish army always was considered to be independent. Erdogan changed that. He put them all in jail and he changed them into Muslim Brotherhood adherents.
Right.
And I'm of the mind, I've sat there and thought, I even asked Joel Richardson about this because I've been pretty critical of Erdogan. By the way, his birthday is 2 days after mine, so he's 70 years old. He has changed that society from top to bottom. I mean, you have to watch what he does. You have to watch what he says. So he took the largest church in Christendom. Now, I don't want to get into whether it's a good church or a bad church.
Sure.
The Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. And what did he do like 6 years ago or whatever, 5 or 6 years ago? He turned it was a church, the largest church ever built by Christians in the world. It was a mosque for many years, and then Ataturk turned it into a museum. Erdogan has turned it back into a mosque.
Right. Well, with that too, I mean, Turkey used to be the place where those in Israel, the citizens, would go there for vacation. It used to be a place where they would just kind of go and just enjoy themselves. And that all changed, many years ago with the whole plateau and so on and so forth, that problem. But where do you see this ending up now? Where do you see Turkey and Russia, what's happening in Syria now, because you got them going, supporting different groups? Where do you see Syria and Russia and Turkey? Where does it all end up at, in your opinion?
Well, now part of this, what happened in Syria, happened because Israel's been so successful in Lebanon against Hezbollah. So Iran has used Syria as a transit point and even a point where weapons were built and developed and that type of thing. Israel, over the last years, as my friend Jonathan Spire calls it, the campaign between the wars, because they knew that we had the war in Lebanon in 2006. Another war was coming. Everybody knew another war was coming in Lebanon. The only question was when. And so Israel did this thing called the campaign between the wars. So we'll stop Hezbollah and Iran from getting implanted too deeply in Lebanon. Now, listen, let's be honest. That campaign was a complete failure. Hezbollah is embedded like you would not believe in southern Lebanon. It's not quite as embedded in Turkey or in Syria because Syria has been in this civil war all these years. But the Hezbollah fighters have gotten a lot of training helping out. So now we're in this situation. And so where's it going? So Israel's done great against Hezbollah. They've taken out, watch the IDF videos of them blowing up weapons manufacturing facilities and tunnels and that type of thing. But I heard Eric Mandel, who's an Israel advocate, the other day. He said, I was in Lebanon. They took me to a tunnel, Hezbollah tunnel. It was 200 feet underground.
Oh, my goodness.
You could drive a truck through it. It had dormitories, communications, all this stuff. Hezbollah built those things for 40 years. And the problem with the Israeli leadership was there was never the political will to do what they needed to do in Gaza to prevent hundreds of miles of tunnels from being built and to prevent Hezbollah from spending 40 years embedding itself in southern Lebanon. But now Israel's done very well. You know, they've taken out thousands of Hezbollah fighters.
Right.
They've lost like 50.
But let me ask you a question.
The numbers are astounding.
Right. Let me kind of try to understand this a little bit more. There's an advocate, Alika Laban. Is it
Alika Laban? Yeah.
Yeah. So she is Iranian American. She's a lawyer. She's a musician, so on and so forth. But she's come out and said, in Iran wants peace. The people of Iran, they want peace. They don't want war with Israel. So she's been well spoken on that. I believe she lives in the United Kingdom now, but she has Iranian roots. So with that being said, with Hezbollah, we're going back 20, 30 years with them, where they started to take care of orphans and women and children and so on and so forth, because they built hospitals, they built schools. So the younger generation coming up, because the widows and the orphans were taken care of by Hezbollah, they were very loyal to Hezbollah, if I understand the history there. So it took 20, 30 years for that generation to rise up. And now once they did, that's how Hezbollah took over the government in Lebanon. Seeing what she's saying, being Iranian, and saying Iran, the people of Iran do not want war with Israel. They want peace with Israel. Is it the same way, do you understand it, with Hezbollah? Do the people in Lebanon still support Hezbollah, or are they turning away from Hezbollah now?
The answer is yes to both.
Okay.
Because there's still a lot of people who support Hezbollah. I mean, they've taken out 4,000 fighters, but there were probably 50 to 100,000 when they started. A lot of them have left. Now they're coming back, and the question is, are they coming back? And the ceasefire thing has the Lebanese army is supposed to be, building up south of the Litani River, which is kind of this arbitrary place about 6 or 8 miles north of the Israeli border, maybe, and only a mile and a half in some places. Like that, keeping Hezbollah north of that with all their rockets and everything is going to make people come back to northern Israel. There's 60, 80,000 people that left their homes.
Right.
50% of the buildings in the towns, and I've been there, Kiryat Shimona, Metula, all the towns along the Lebanon border in Israel, they're empty. 50% of their buildings are destroyed. The cost to rebuild this is just enormous. And so what's it going to take to make it so people can come back? But so David Wormser is very right that this thing is an enormous mess. I would say there are a lot of people in Lebanon right now that say, we're done with Hezbollah. What good did we get from Hezbollah? We're starting to look like Gaza. And I think what Israel did in Gaza was, it was sending a message. Like Hezbollah, you see what we're doing in Gaza?
Correct.
We can do this. We can do this all the way to and including Beirut and the Bekaa Valley.
Right.
Is that how you want to end up? And so there's a psychological war on. But understand, they don't think the way we do. The Muslim, and I'm not talking about the ones that Alika Laban talks about who want peace. They think differently. And I had this discussion with, maybe we talked about it. Are they really in the beeper and pager attacks where they had their eyes blown out, their hands blown off? Now, to an Israeli, you would look at these people who are maimed for life. And they wanted to be a martyr for Islam. And you could say, listen, guy, you'll never be a martyr for Islam because you're not even capable of killing yourself now. You're humiliated. But what does Hezbollah do? They put up the videos of these guys. Look at the wounds of the martyrs are the glory of the mothers, or something like that. I saw the videos. It's a completely skewed mindset from how we would approach it. And I don't know that they don't look at it as humiliation. They look at it as martyrdom. And that's the problem.
Well, do the people, I mean, the whole ceasefire goes back to redoing the United Nations Resolution 1701. There shouldn't have been anything in that between the northern part of Israel and the river anyhow, and that's going back to that. Do the people embrace that? Do they reject that? Do they not even care about that? Where do the average person, do you know, in Lebanon feel about what's happening as far as the ceasefire, 1701, what's happening, and so on and so forth?
Look, I don't know any Lebanese. I know a lot of Israelis who live in the north.
Okay.
And I could talk to them, some of them, Avraham Levine, who's with Alma Research, Zarit Zahavi, and Boaz, I can't remember his last name, all of whom I've interviewed. They live along the border up there. You know, they might live a half a mile from the Syrian border or the Lebanon border. And Avraham says, I grew up along the Lebanon border. I used to go over and play in the villages in Lebanon. We used to get along. And so I think people would like to live in peace, but that's kind of prophetic in a way that people will do accept almost anything for peace.
Right.
But this is a problem. So let me just read a paragraph from David's article. Everybody should read this.
Sure.
So everything's melting down in Syria right now. Russia's, they're bombing places. They're moving past, they moved past Aleppo. They're moving towards Homs, the rebel forces. And these, by the way, these are Al-Qaeda. These are bad people. The Syrian...
You have some ISIS fighters there too, don't you?
Some of them left ISIS and came into some of these jihadi groups.
Right.
Some that are with Turkey, some that are with Al-Qaeda. And then you have the Syrian army, which is, not the best army. The country, we think of Syria as this place on the map, but that's not Syria. Syria is all divided up into all these little parts. And Menachem Begin was asked a question years ago when Iraq and Iran were fighting each other. And, the question was, what does this mean for Israel? And he goes when they're done with each other, they're coming after us. He says, so in their fight between the two of them, we wish them both great success. And I think that's exactly what is happening here. So here's what David Wormser says in his article. The rise of these new threats, which are slowly reaching not only a visible but an acute phase, only increases the urgency of dispensing with the Iranian threat expeditiously. Neither the United States nor our allies in the region any longer have the luxury of a slow containment and delaying strategy in Iran. Instead, it is necessary to move towards decisive victory in the twilight struggle with the Ayatollah Sunnis. So, in other words, start with the Ayatollahs. This is very interesting, and this goes back to this fulfilled prophecy in a discussion I was having with a very nice lady online. It was very gracious and everything, even though we disagree. And so the thinking has been, well, Daniel 8, this talks about Persia, the goat, the two-horned goat, and the ram that come together and fight. And there's a battle. And so if you look at a lot of Bible prophecy things, I think Dr. Walvard and some others, they'll say that was fulfilled. That was the Grecian, the ram that came across quickly, and that was Alexander, and this was all fulfilled a long time ago.
Right.
But verse 15 says that it is a vision for the time of the end. 15 or 16 of Daniel chapter 8.
Okay.
And so the question is, so what does the time of the end mean there? Does the time of the end there bear any relationship to the time of the end in Daniel chapter 12? Are they this? I'd have to go back and look at the Hebrew or Aramaic. That part of Daniel might be in Aramaic.
Right.
And see if they're the same phrasing. But I think they are. And so the question is, so how does this all fit? But is Daniel 8 a future prophecy? And is Daniel 8 a prophecy that relates to a battle that takes place between Turkey, which kind of comes from that Grecian direction, and Iran, Persia?
That's the ram and goat you're talking about.
That's right. Is that in play right now? I personally think that it is.
So how far does this all go? I did an article this week. We just hit 1,000 days with the war in Ukraine. So
Okay.
I did an article on that, talking about that. And what came up now, you have Sweden coming out and telling the people prepare for war.
Yep, I
You
used
have
that as well. Yep.
Finland coming out and telling the people prepare for war. You have Norway coming out telling the people to prepare for war. So what happens? How far does this go? I mean, does this? You have you have NATO coming out and saying it could possibly be World War III, and biblically, we have a different picture of that. You have geopolitics, you have biblical stuff, and you have the Middle East happening. Do you see it all shaken together? Do you see it being small little battles? Do you see a bigger battle? What's your expertise say there?
I have concerns that we're on the verge of a massive world war.
Okay.
Well, first of all, I think we're already in a world war.
Okay.
Okay. I think it's going to grow. The question is how much, what happened, and you always want to say what happens to the United States. So, there's a lot of people, they think America is Mystery Babylon and we get nuked by Russia. Now, they tie that to Revelation 17, and I'm like, but I don't know if they're out of sequence. They say, well, Revelation isn't in, they always have that, well, Revelation isn't in chronological sequence. But then there are a lot of things in Revelation 17 that are tied to Mystery Babylon that I don't think they can identify in the world yet. So I have a problem with that, of planting the flag too soon.
Right.
But listen, Russia is powerful, but it's not all powerful. And they have this missile, the Obenchik missile or whatever it's called, that they launched into Ukraine last week, hypersonic missile.
Yeah, Forbes magazine just did an article on that.
And the Forbes article, I thought, was very well thought out because the guy looked into the physics.
Yes.
It seems like you've been reading my mail or something.
I don't know. It's just, I didn't know I was reading the article until you started talking about it. I said, wait a minute, I just read that. Someone emailed that article you're referring to me. But this, because I was doing on war in the 1,000-day battle with Ukraine, I got this one. And they're saying basically Putin is threatening nuclear war, which is part of what I taught on this week. But they're saying when he tested that last week, basically this ballistic missile did nothing. It was nothing but as they said, it was nothing more than an impressive fireworks show.
That's right. And so the question is, so for example, Russia has for years touted they have these hypersonic missiles. Right. When Putin introduced those, look, I spent a lot of time on the Kremlin website, and Putin, everybody says, oh, Putin, he's sick, he's ill. I'm telling you, he goes to these big conferences and he's on stage for 4 hours and never leaves to go to the bathroom, as far as I can tell. And for a 72-year-old guy, that's like a miracle. How is he? What is he doing? Does he never take a drink of water or anything? But he's been threatening nuclear war. Years ago, he said, listen, we won't do the first nuclear strike, but if we're afraid, he said this years ago at the Valdiv dialogues, but if we feel threatened, we'll do it, and we'll nuke you, and you'll nuke us, and we'll go to heaven, and you'll go to hell. Mm. And so you have to understand the Putin mindset is very mystical, Russian Orthodox, religious restoration of Mother Russia, which some people, by the way, in Jewish circles view Russia as the Third Rome.
As the what?
Third Rome. Okay. Which is kind of interesting, the terminology that they use. Whether they're right or not, it's sort of like, where did they come up with that? And why does that ring a bell with a lot of us in the Bible prophecy community? So it's very complicated. I do think that Daniel 8 is kind of in play. And it could be that Turkey takes over Iran. But listen, when you look at the landscape, and I talked to, I was watching just the last 2 days, somebody from Israel, and they said, listen, nothing good happens. Whoever wins in Turkey is a problem, or in Turkey, whoever wins in Syria is a massive problem for us. If the jihadis beat Assad, that's not good. They're coming after us. If Iran prevails and the Hezbollah militias in the Golan Heights areas are reconstituted, help out in Lebanon, they're coming after Israel. So Israel, I think, would like to have Assad in place because he's the problem they can manage.
Right.
But he's not the problem that's necessarily going to invade us. I mean, the invasion that we read about in Ezekiel 38, 39, that's Gog, Magog, Turkey, Persia. And so is it a totally independent Ayatollah-run Persia? Maybe it's a Turkey-run Persia, like Turkey ran all those countries in the Middle East during the time of the Ottoman Empire. They gave people a lot of leeway.
Yeah, you got Kamal, in Iran calling for the death of Netanyahu, so he's publicly calling, not just they're trying to assassinate him and get him out of the picture. And it's amazing the way the world receives all this information as well, too. We haven't mentioned it, but I throw Obadiah. I throw verse 15 and Obadiah into it as well. The house of Jacob and the house of, the Esau and so on and so forth. What's going to happen there?
I was just studying that last week in Genesis about, by the way, Esau is Edom, right? It says that Genesis 36:8, I think.
Yep.
And Esau married into the line of Ishmael, which is from where we get the Arabs.
Yep.
And look at the genealogy. Who's the first generation of that union of Esau and his Ishmael's daughter? A guy named Amalek.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
And when Netanyahu comes and says, we are fighting Amalek, listen to what he says and go read about Amalek in the Bible. Yeah. And there's even, I think, some people would identify Amalek as Gog, as an antichrist, final antichrist. So,
well, it says the house of Joseph will be aflame, the house of Jacob, house of Jacob will be aflame. So Israel will be attacked. There's going to be a pain there. But it says the house of Esau will be stubble. They won't survive, which will be those Arab nations. So again, Obadiah brings that timing into it.
The question is, when does that happen?
Exactly. That's
and then I also think I think the Ezekiel or Psalm 83 thing is 10 nations, 10 people groups that are identified. And you can kind of make a coordinated thing between them and the Abraham Accords. People who come into a peace agreement with Israel, but it's a fake peace. That's what we have to understand. There's a peace coming, and we may be closer to that than ever.
Well, that's the whole Antichrist coming onto the platform. I mean, he will come on with that face,
peace and safety.
Picture. Yeah. The world will be clamoring for something, and he'll be a charismatic personality with the proposal of peace, and people will gravitate towards it. But
it's very complicated, and it's something that we could talk about for a very, very long time.
We could, and I try to say, okay, how do I bring it down to the average person? So why should we be concerned about Syria? Why should we stay on top of what's happening there? How does it affect us? I'm fascinated with the Turkey-Russian connection and how they're going in opposite directions, but somehow got to connect. And we're getting close to running out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time as well.
That's fine.
One of the last things, too, the International Criminal Court, the ICC, putting out arrest warrants. I went on their website, on their calendar. They're in session next week. So that'll be the last session they have for the year. And basically they're saying because of what they've done, they're having some of their judges are having death threats come their way because of some of the things they're putting out there. And looking more at their record, they've had 32 cases before the court. Judges have issued 59 arrest warrants. But of that, 30 people are still at large. So far, they've had 11 convictions and 4 acquittals. And they're coming after Israel pretty hard.
And they have a $200 million a year budget.
Yeah. And you brought up the pagers and what happened with the fighters in Lebanon. That was one of the best ways of doing fighting without any civil casualties I could ever think of. Israel goes to the extreme to make sure there's no civil casualties. They will drop leaflets and tell people beforehand. And then you look what's happening in Iran. You don't get the ICC doing anything there. We have South Korea now going down a martial law, which they're trying to reverse. But yeah, South Korea calling for martial law as of 2 days ago. Nothing being said about that. It's amazing how the world is going after Israel to where it's not just a physical battle, but it's a spiritual issue as well. So we have to put that spiritual side into it, even though people like Putin and so on and so forth will have a different spiritual background. We have to stick with the biblical side of it and say, what is God doing? What's the timing of this in our day? And how do we prepare? How do we share the gospel? I mean, when I look at the ICC and these war crimes they want to put out there, even some of the members of ICC says we won't enforce these war crimes. If they land in France, they're not going to arrest Netanyahu. So the world is getting even more chaotic, which is again one of the signs of end times. How do we make sure people understand the spiritual side of this and not just the political side or the geographic side?
That's always interesting, and it's kind of there's kind of a use the opportunity to share the gospel. I mean, listen, this is, golly, it's got to be 10, 12 years ago. There were tension in the Middle East. It was the Syrian civil war. And I had a female partner. She walked into my office and she said, "Is this the end of the world?" And I'm like, "Are you sure you want to be asking me that question? Because you know what it is." But listen, I don't know where this goes. Listen, I'm concerned about what Russia's doing, what Russia's saying, the way they're acting, the videos they're putting out. I mean, yesterday, David, I'll just tell you this. There were tweets from some of the open source intelligence people that Russia was pulling out of the naval base in Syria. And we're all like, oh, they're pulling out, so maybe they can be drawn back in at the end.
Yeah, they built the base.
That's right. But what happened over the last 24 hours? They had a massive naval hypersonic missile exercise in the Mediterranean.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that they left. They probably just left the base to go out into the Mediterranean to do these missile tests to scare everybody. So we should be scared. I mean, look, they have an economy the size of Texas, but they've got a lot of nuclear weapons and that type of thing. How powerful that Forbes article was good, how powerful these hypersonics are, how controllable they are, that's up in the question, and how accurate they are. But let's just say there's something to be worried about. And if they were able to be controlled, they could take out an aircraft carrier with one missile.
Right. And again, we're about out of time, but
Sure.
Russia has their fingers in so many different aspects. I mean, just when we look at Iran and what's going on over there, because they put the S-400 as far as the missile launchers there, Israel now, if they're going to attack Iran, they got to include Russia because Iran, if I understand this correctly, do not have the personnel to really operate the S-400. They could do the S-300s, but not the S-400s. So if Israel were to bomb the missiles from that unit, there'd be Russian personnel there. So Israel has to talk to Russia before they bomb Iran, and Russia and Iran are in cahoots together. So it gets so deep and so complicated when you understand what's happening behind the scenes, where you just throw your hands up and go, what's the average believer supposed to understand and do? So that's where my heart is, helping people understand that.
I think, get a hold of those Swedish and Finland brochures that were put out that you held up there in time of crisis and war, whatever it is.
Yeah, 32 pages.
And do some preparation and prepare to help your neighbors and everything, because we could be on the verge of a nuclear exchange.
Right.
I don't know what that looks like. There's some people that's pretty dark. But, a lot of people survive those too. So
right.
I'm just telling you, David, I think we're on the verge of some crazy things. And, and then you look at the situation with our government now. We got 49 days till Donald Trump takes the presidency. And then what's going to happen? Who knows?
He does.
Is he going to take the presidency?
That's what I'm saying. Let's hope he does. Yes.
Yeah. So anyway, look, I think we need to be in prayer, be close to the believers and friends around you, and don't be afraid to share the gospel with people, because listen, the one thing I'm certain as I've looked at church history is dead people never accept the gospel. You only get that chance while you're alive. And so I think there should be a sense of urgency on that, sharing that on the parts of all of us.
Yeah, and that's the key. That's the key word, is having urgency there. So, the whole purpose of this time together was to talk about Israel, which we didn't get to.
We didn't really get to, so we'll do it again.
We'll do it again. I want the ICC and the arrest warrants they're putting out for the war crimes. Do you think that will stop any kind of the tourism in Israel? Would people be afraid to go over there?
Well, I don't know that they'll be afraid. By the way, in the UK, when people come back to the airports in London now from outside the country, they're met with a sign. Have you been to Israel? It's the Metropolitan Police. Have you been to Israel or areas in Palestine? And do you have things that you saw that concerned you? Give us a call. That's the UK. UK has said they'll arrest Netanyahu if he comes.
Right, they have.
I think it's going to impact tourism because people it's hard to get there. I mean, a lot of airlines aren't flying. I hope to go over in March, but that's kind of up in the air. I was going to go last year, but it kind of, Brandon and Tom and friends of ours, they've had trips canceled, many trips.
Yeah. Well, Tom just had a great trip over there, with him and his wife. So
so I'm just telling you, David, I think that to the extent that you can do it, support people. Israel is in a very, very difficult spot right now. I know that God will protect them, but there's also the practical side. There are people hurting. There are organizations that you contribute to. Marriages are falling apart because guys are out on reserve duty. They're coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder. You can't have long deployments of reserve soldiers. Their lives are completely uprooted. And the question is, how would Israel occupy Gaza or occupy Lebanon to prevent this from happening again? I don't know. I will say this. There has been a very big supernatural component to what I've seen go on over there.
Absolutely.
There have been things that they've done. So when we talked about this early on in the war in Gaza and the war in Lebanon, we were talking about 17,000 dead soldiers. There are 850.
Yeah.
That is a miracle.
Right.
That is a divine protection. 50 in Lebanon as opposed to 4,000 Hezbollah fighters.
Correct.
You cannot explain that any other way. So there is that, but it's still a very difficult situation because it's very hard on the people. And I'm concerned about it. I mean, I was texting with somebody at 2:00 this morning in Israel saying, I'm concerned about what's going on. I'm concerned about what's going on in Syria. And the consensus is Turkey is very active in Syria and going to be very active in Syria. They're bombing the smithereens out of the Kurds.
And that's where my focus is. How far does Turkey go, and what do they want to do? So, but again, John,
I know we got to go. Pray for the Kurds. There's a lot of Christians there. There's a lot of Christians in Iran. There's Christians in Syria, and these people are, believe me, these jihadis on all sides are going to persecute them, and that's very concerning.
Right. Well, let me say again, with John Holler, I would really recommend you guys track him down, look at his prophecy updates. He does that every Sunday at 11 a.m. You can catch them on YouTube or Rumble, so please go back and watch them. The details and the depth are incredible. So, John, thank you for being a resource. Thank you for being on the show with us. Again, I'm Pastor Dave, Interpreting the Times, the Final Hour podcast. You can find more information about our ministry with interpretingthetimes.com. We'll be back next week. We got Don Perkins coming up. We got Kurt Reed coming up in future podcasts. So look forward to seeing you very shortly. Thanks. God bless.
Thank you for joining us today on the Final Hour podcast. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future content. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share this podcast with your family and friends as you help them see that we are living in the final hour. If you want more of Pastor Dave's teaching, you can join our community called Prophecy Seekers, or you can reach us at interpretingthetimes.com. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you next time on the Final Hour podcast.